My girl, I'm so glad you're enjoying the apartment I got you." The words came wrapped in champagne bubbles and sunlight. Grandpa raised his mimosa like it was any other warm Sunday. His voice cut through the clinking of silverware and casual laughter. Floating over the brunch table like a balloon released to early light, careless, impossible to catch once it was gone. Everyone smiled, except me. The orange juice caught in my throat. I froze, glass midway to my lips. My hands trembled slightly, but I steadied the cup like I had trained myself to do. Don't he let them see the cracks. The air didn't change all at once. It curdled. My mom's mascara-coated lashes fluttered in confusion. My sister glanced up from her phone, one perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. Dad dropped his fork. It hit the porcelain plate with a sharp clink, like a distant gunshot. Time slowed. The sound reverberated, then vanished, leaving only the uneasy hush that follows an earthquake. I felt it before I understood it a shift. Not outside, but inside me. Like something had ruptured beneath my skin. Like my bones no longer fit the way they used to. I wiped my fingers on the napkin in my lap, trying to ground myself in something fabric, texture, routine. Then I looked up. Straight at Grandpa. "I live in a basement," I said. His smile collapsed, not slowly, not gently, like a dropped mirror, sharp edges, and no warning. "What?" he asked, his voice an octave higher, still half laughing as if I were joking. As if this were still brunch and not a reckoning. "I never got any apartment," I said, louder now. Clear, cutting. "You never gave me anything." Silence landed like a dead weight on the table, heavy and wet. I could feel it pressing against my shoulders, against my lungs. I wasn't going to cry not today. Had made peace with too much, endured too long, to crumble over scrambled eggs and fruit salad. Across from me, my mother stirred her coffee. The spoon rattled against the cup, her hand shaking just enough to betray her composure. My sister slowly set down her phone. Dad rubbed his temples like this was a headache he could massage away. "What are you talking about?" Grandpa asked again, but slower this time. His voice carried something else now, a hesitation. A flicker of something he didn't want to name out. I looked around the table. They all looked away. "You never sent me anything," I said, my voice low but certain. "I've been living in a windowless basement for 4 years. The only thing this family has ever given me is silence." My words hung there, suspended, like smoke in a locked room. There was nowhere for them to go, nowhere for them to dissipate. They just hovered. Heavy. True. I felt every pair of eyes on me, but not one of them met mine fully. Like I was a painting they regretted hanging on the wall. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Maybe it finally surfaced. The years of missed birthdays, the job rejections. The way my father always said, "Figure it out," with a shrug, like I was asking too much. The times my mother said, "It builds character," when I told her I was working nights and skipping meals. The way my sister posted pictures of avocado toast in sunlit kitchens, while I ate canned soup beside a dryer that shook the entire room. They thought I had forgotten. They thought I had forgiven. But I remembered everything. I felt every inch of it like cold iron in my lungs. "I asked for help once," I continued, speaking not to Grandpa now, but to the table. To the history we never acknowledged, just once. Right after graduation. I asked Dad if he knew anyone hiring. He said, and I quote, "Try flipping burgers first. It builds character." I turned to my father. He looked like he was about to speak, but stopped himself. Good. Let the silence eat him alive for once. "And all this time," I said, "you let me believe I was the failure? Yeah. You let me scrub toilets and beg landlords while pretending I was just ... ungrateful?" My voice cracked, but not with emotion. With rage. Quiet rage. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that simmers, bubbles, then boils so slowly it scars you from the inside out. Grandpa leaned back in his chair. His hands gripped the arms, knuckles white. I had never seen him look small before, but he did now. Not because I had hurt him, but because someone else had. Someone he trusted. "Kayla," he said, barely above a whisper, "I wired the down payment to your dad 4 years ago. I swear to you, I was told it was all taken care of." And just like that, the ground shifted again. My gaze moved to my father, slowly, purposefully. "Is that true?" I asked, though I already knew. His jaw twitched. No, I said. It's theft. A single gasp escaped someone's mouth. Might have been my cousin. Might have been me. But it didn't matter, because the illusion had shattered. And in its place, something colder and far more dangerous had taken root. The beginning of the truth. The beginning of war. The clink of Grandpa's chair scraping backward cut through the silence like a blade. He stared at me, eyes wide, confused, then narrowed as if suddenly trying to remember something long buried. I wired the down payment to your father, he said slowly, like the words tasted bitter in his mouth. 4 years ago. It's right after you graduated, he told me. He told me he surprised you with it. My entire body went still. The year the last bit of hope drained from me. I turned my head, slowly, deliberately, until my eyes landed on my father. The year I stopped asking why life always felt uphill. 4 years ago. That was the year I moved into that basement. He stared at the table like he could will it to open up and swallow him whole. She turned to him, face drawn, lips painted too bright for the occasion. You told me you helped her find a cute place downtown. You said she cried when she walked in? My mouth dried like someone had stuffed it with dust. He didn't meet my gaze. Danielle. Mom's voice cracked like old porcelain.
Dad blinked. Swallowed. I did mean to, he mumbled. Things just got complicated.
The way a spider's web is complicated, sticky, twisted, laced with venom. I leaned forward, hands clenched on the edge of the table. No, I said, calm as frost. You meant to keep it. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. A man who had just discovered his own blood had betrayed him. To eat cold beans from a can with a plastic spoon because you can afford both rent and groceries in the same week? A collective breath sucked in around the table. His breath was shallow. His shoulders slumped. You didn't forget. You didn't misplace it. You kept it. Whether it was horror at what I lived through, or horror that this was being spoken aloud in public, it didn't care. A fork dropped somewhere behind me. My cousin let out a quiet, "Oh my God." Grandpa leaned back, lips pressed tight, eyes not moving. I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. You told me to hustle, to grind, to quit looking for handouts. Just a daughter who should have smiled harder, tried harder, stayed silent longer. All while you were sitting on the money that was supposed to help me breathe, to build something, to begin. Because the rage wasn't hot. It was cold, heavy, and it had waited too long to be released. You told me to stop acting entitled, I said, voice low but cutting. But since we're all here, celebrating birthdays and pretending we're a family, maybe it's time we stop playing house. He stared at his glass, his fingers twitching slightly, like he wanted to reach for it but couldn't trust his hand not to shake. My dad said nothing. My chair scraped against the tile, echoing like a scream in a cave. I had lived in silence for 4 years. Now I was done letting silence win. Do you know what it's like? I said, eyes flicking from one family member to the next, to sleep beside a boiler that clicks all night wondering if it's leaking gas? Mom's lips parted in horror. Grandpa looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. This wasn't a mistake, I said. This was a decision. Right. Finally, my father lifted his gaze and met mine. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't even guilty. Each step on the restaurant tile felt like it echoed forever. They were empty. Like this wasn't real to him. Like I wasn't real. I did what I thought was best, he said. Apologized for things I couldn't control. Diminished myself so my family wouldn't feel uncomfortable. I felt something crack knot in him, in me. I paused, placing my palm flat against the wall just to steady myself. To remind myself I was still here, still standing, because I had always known he would lie. I just didn't expect him to still believe it. I stood up. I wasn't going to say anything, I said, voice trembling, not with fear, but with rage reined in. I glanced at my sister. Her eyes were wide, phone long forgotten. Mom reached for Dad's hand, but he pulled away slightly. Grandpa. Grandpa looked broken, but not at me. At him. At the son who had worn a mask so long he forgot he was even hiding. I turned without another word, walked out. Behind me, I heard chairs shuffling, whispering, a server dropping something in the kitchen, but I didn't turn back, not this time. The hallway outside was cool and dim, a relief after the heat that had bloomed around that table. My chest ached, but not from sadness, from release. From the weight finally peeling off my ribs. For 4 years, I had folded myself into corners. No more. I didn't hear footsteps until I reached the parking lot. Fast ones, heavy. But they weren't my father's. They were Grandpa's. "Kayla," he called, voice trembling but firm. "Wait," I turned, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not disappointment, not confusion, but sorrow. And beneath it, something even more fragile. Truth. The hallway outside the restaurant was dim and cold in abrupt contrast to the artificial warmth of the brunch table I'd just escaped. Yet even here, I could feel the weight of their stares, like ghostly hands clawing at my back. Their silence still clung to me like wet cloth. Then came the voice. "Kayla, wait." I stopped. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shame. It was my grandfather. His voice cracked, winded. Something about the way he said my name made me turn, and when I did, I barely recognized him. His shoulders, always so straight and proud, sagged beneath the weight of betrayal. The light in his eyes was no longer sparklet, was sorrow, sharp and wet like glass underfoot. His mimosa was gone, so was his smile. "You never got the apartment?" he asked, as if the question itself hurt to form. I shook my head. A pause. Then, like I had rehearsed it 1,000 times in my sleep, I told him the truth. "I rent a basement from a woman who smokes so much her wallpaper turned yellow. There's a boiler next to my bed. It clicks at night like it's laughing. My rent is paid in cash because she doesn't believe in banks. Dinner is on the floor most nights. On a paper towel? The plastic forks? When I can afford them?" The words didn't tremble. They cut. Grandpa blinked once, twice, then looked away like he couldn't bear to meet the weight of my truth. His hand rose to his mouth. His wedding ring glinted in the light, a detail so small and random that it struck me. Still wore it after all these years. Loyal to the dead, betrayed by the living. "Your father said you didn't want help," he murmured. "That you were. Trying to be independent," I laughed. It wasn't a nice sound. It was hollow like a cracked bell. "I asked him for a job lead once," I said. "He told me, and I quote, 'Try flipping burgers. Builds character.'" Grandpa winced like I'd hit him. Maybe I had. I didn't stop. He said I was ungrateful. That I moved into my dream place and never even thanked him. The laugh that escaped me this time was sharper, darker. I didn't know there was anything to thank him for. Silence stretched between us like barbed wire. We didn't move. The world around us did, cars passing, wind whispering through dying leaves, but we stood frozen in that hallway. 2 generations facing the rot buried in the roots. "I trusted him," Grandpa said at last. It came out like a confession. I swallowed. "He lied to both of us," I replied. I expected that to be the end. A tragic punctuation to a twisted family secret. But instead, he straightened. Not completely. His back was still tired. His frame still weathered, but his jaw firmed, and his eyes narrowed not in disbelief, but in resolve. A flicker of steel returned to his bones. "So what now?" I asked. That question, God, I had asked it so many times before. After every rejection letter, after every bruised ego, after every time I curled up on that concrete floor and wondered if this was all life would ever be. But this time, the question didn't fall into a void. Grandpa met my gaze. And for once, I saw no denial, no excuses, just truth. "Now," he said, stepping closer, "I want to see where you live." I blinked. "What?" "I want to see it," he repeated, softer but firmer. "I need to see it with my own eyes, because if it's half as bad as what you saying, I believe you. Kayla, then your father didn't just lie to you. He stole from me too. I'm done letting anyone lie to me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone, not entirely. He didn't touch me, didn't reach out. But he didn't need to." His voice had changed. There was no confusion in it anymore. No hesitation. That night, the silence in the car was a presence of its own, thick, pulsing. Grandpa sat beside me, hands folded in his lap, staring out the window like he was watching the last pieces of a puzzle shift into place. We didn't speak much on the drive. What was there to say? He'd been lied to. I'd been erased. And now both of us were heading straight into the truth. I parked by the alley like I always did, next to the broken lamppost and the dumpster that reeked of old oil and rotting takeout. The air smelled like rust and sour regret. A cat darted across the pavement, vanishing behind a pile of discarded furniture. "This is it?" Grandpa asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I said. "Home sweet home." We walked together, his steps slow but deliberate. As we descended the narrow concrete stairs to the basement, I noticed his hand graze the rusted railing, his fingers tightening. Whether for balance or preparation, I wasn't sure. I unlocked the door, the metal creaking like a protest, and pushed it open. The smell hit him first mildew and decades of stale cigarette smoke. The overhead bulb flickered weakly, casting everything in the kind of yellow light that makes shadows stretch too long. I stepped aside and let him in. "Welcome to the palace," I said, half smiling. Gaze moved slowly, deliberately soaking in every detail. The second-hand couch with stuffing peeking from the seams. The stained ceiling tiles water-warped and sagging like a collapsed memory. The bookcase tilted and duct-taped, threatening to fall if you breathed near it. The tiny bed pushed against the laundry machine. The pile of notebooks on the floor, half covered with a jacket I used as a blanket in winter when the heating failed. Grandpa stepped toward the bed and sat down. It creaked beneath his weight, as if protesting the intrusion of something that still held dignity. He didn't look at me. Instead, he looked at the room. All of it. And then he whispered, "This. This is what you've been living in since college ended?" I said softly. He nodded once. Slowly, as if the movement itself took effort, he told me. He told me he was saving the rest for your wedding. You didn't want it all at once. I laughed, dry and cracked. "There is no rest," I said. "You gave him $70,000. It disappeared the moment it hit his account." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, grave. He didn't speak for a long time. He stared at the floor, as if he could still hear echoes of conversations he'd believed for years. And then finally, he looked up at me. His face wasn't angry, it was broken. Weathered by shame not his own. "Not anymore," he said. His voice was low, but filled with something unfamiliar. Not rage, not sorrow, conviction. "Tomorrow," he continued, "standing up, we go to the bank. Then the lawyer." I blinked. "You mean it?" He nodded. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have asked questions. But your father's always had a way of sounding so certain. So clean. I wanted to believe the best. Maybe because if I didn't, I'd have to admit how wrong I'd been. I stayed quiet. Because I knew that feeling too well. Wanting to believe. Even when everything inside you said not to. Grandpa looked around the room once more, then back at me. His voice cracked not from weakness, but from the strain of finally seeing. "He used my love for you against me," he said. "That broke something in me. And something else. Healed." We didn't hug. That wasn't our style. But when he reached out and gently touched the corner of my desk, running his fingers over one of my sketchbooks, I knew he understood something he hadn't before. "I used to think independence meant doing it all alone," I said. "That asking for help was failure, that needing someone made me weak." "And now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "I think the real failure is letting people lie to you just because the truth hurts." He nodded. We stood there in the yellow glow, grandfather and granddaughter, surrounded by everything that had been stolen from us in silence. And yet, something shifted. The weight didn't vanish, but it lightened, if only slightly, because I wasn't alone anymore. Because someone had finally seen what I'd been forced to carry. When Grandpa left that night, he paused at the top of the steps, the wind tugging at his jacket. He turned back to me. "You're not staying here much longer," he said. "I promise you that." Then he walked into the night. And for the first time in years, I believed someone when they said they wouldn't leave me behind. Sunday morning, the smell of burnt coffee drifted down the hallway. Before the sound of Grandpa's voice pierced the quiet. "I don't care if it's Sunday, Howard," he said, firm and sharp. "Trace every transfer. I want dates, names, routing numbers, everything. And draft a letter revoking Daniel's authority over my accounts, permanently." I stood barefoot on the cold concrete floor, just beyond the kitchen's edge, invisible but listening. His voice didn't tremble. It rang like steel. This wasn't the man who used to sneak me extra cookies at family dinners. This was something older, something colder, something precise. He wasn't my protector that morning. He was my weapon. By noon, we sat in a wood-paneled office downtown, one of those buildings that smelled like old money and silent deals. The receptionist had greeted Grandpa with nervous respect. Clearly, he still carried weight in this city. It's the banker, a woman in her 50s with taut features and the kind of posture that never softened. Adjusted her glasses as she clicked through files on her monitor. "I do see the transfer," she said, her voice neutral. $70,000. From Mr. Harold Whitmore to Daniel Whitmore, marked as a gift intended for Ms. Kayla Whitmore's condo. I felt the air leave my lungs as if someone had punched me square in the ribs. Even though I already knew the truth, seeing it printed in neat Helvetica on a financial screen made it real in a new way. A number, a date, a lie that wore a suit and tie. Then the woman clicked again. Another page, another transaction. 5 days later, she continued, squinting slightly. Daniel Whitmore moved the full amount into a private investment account under his name. No reference to Ms. Whitmore. No co-ownership. No trust. No mention of the intended purpose. She turned the monitor slightly toward us. I didn't even need to look, but I did. There it was. The date. The amount. The betrayal. My fists curled in my lap, nails digging into my palms like they were trying to anchor me to the moment. Grandpa, sitting beside me, didn't flinch. He leaned forward. "Can I get a printed copy of all of that?" he asked calmly. "Of course, sir," the banker replied, already reaching for the printer. As the pages began to spool out behind her, Grandpa turned to me. His voice was quieter now, but more dangerous for it. "This isn't family drama, Kayla," he said. "This is theft. This is fraud. He used my name to manipulate both of us." I swallowed hard, the weight of everything pressed against my chest like a boulder made of silence. "I know," I said, then looked at him. "So let's handle it." He nodded slowly. "Together." That word struck me like lightning. Together. It didn't erase the pain. Didn't undo the years I spent in darkness while others dined above. But it was a beginning, a shared sword aimed in the right direction. When the banker returned, she handed Grandpa the printed documents, 3 pages, each stamped, each damning. He took them with careful hands, folded them once, and slid them into a leather folder he'd brought from home. I noticed then his knuckles were white. "Thank you," he said, rising to his feet. The banker nodded politely, but I saw something in her eyes as she glanced at me, a flicker of sympathy. Or maybe awe. Or maybe just the quiet horror people feel when they realize some families rot from the inside. Back in the car, the folder sat between us on the console like a loaded gun. Neither of us spoke for a while. The city passed outside in cold blur steel buildings, gray sky, traffic that moved too fast. "I trusted him with everything," Grandpa finally said. "I trusted him with nothing," I replied. "And somehow, we still both lost." He let out a dry exhale. "I used to think Daniel was the responsible one, the one who had his head on straight. You always seemed, well, passionate, but scattered." "I was," I said honestly, "but that didn't make me disposable." He turned to look at me. "No, it didn't." Another pause. Then, "He raised you with silence." I should have filled it with something better, that landed harder than I expected. I looked away. My reflection stared back at me from the passenger window, tired eyes. Set jaw, a flicker of something that had survived the basement but never quite escaped it. "You can't change what happened," I said, "but we can stop pretending." He nodded, and we drove on. That afternoon, he made 2 more calls. One to his lawyer. One to a real estate agent. His voice never rose, never cracked. But the language he used was the kind that comes from people who are done being deceived. By nightfall, the folder had grown thicker. Legal documents, bank confirmations, a signed statement from the lawyer declaring Daniel's financial authority fully revoked. And still no calls from my father. No apologies. No explanations. Just silence. But this time, the silence didn't belong to me. It belonged to him. And it was deafening. That afternoon, the sun was warm, but felt like a spotlight. Too bright, too exposing. The kind of light that doesn't comfort, it interrogates. Grandpa and I stood shoulder to shoulder on the porch of the house where I'd grown up. It looked smaller than I remembered. The shutters hadn't been painted in years. The doorbell still gave off that sickly chime, like a laugh that didn't quite reach the eyes. I glanced at Grandpa. He was holding the leather folder in both hands, like it was a sacred object or a weapon. Maybe both. Then the door creaked open. My father stood there, wearing his usual weekend uniform sweatpants, slippers, a t-shirt from some charity 5K he probably never ran. His brow furrowed. His eyes scanned between the two of us. Confusion morphed into mild irritation. "What's going on?" he asked. "Is something wrong?" "We need to talk," Grandpa said, voice steady. Dad shrugged. "I'm kind of busy right now." "Sit down," Grandpa replied. Not a shout, not a plea, just a simple command, unflinching, final. Dad hesitated, then stepped aside. We walked into the living room. The furniture was exactly as I remembered it, slightly off-white, slightly outdated, like everything had once been better, and no one wanted to admit it had faded. My mom was in the kitchen, drying her hands with a towel. She looked over at us and stilled. My sister hovered at the edge of the stairs, sensing tension like a dog smelling a storm. We all sat. Grandpa placed the thick folder on the coffee table between us. My father didn't even glance at it. He leaned back into his seat like this was an inconvenience, an interruption in his peaceful weekend. Then Grandpa spoke. "You told me Kayla was living in the apartment I bought her." My father blinked. "That was a lie," Grandpa continued, the words heavy with something bitter. "You took the money. You stole from her. And from me." Dad chuckled, a nervous twitch. That same fake charm he always used when cornered. "Come on, Dad. You're blowing this way out of no," Grandpa snapped, sharp as a blade. "She's been living in a basement, with a boiler by her bed. Working 2 jobs to survive while you padded your investment portfolio with money that was never yours?" I could see it then, Dad trying to calculate his next move. How to spin it, how to discredit it, how to twist the story back in his favor. But this time, I cut in. "You told me I was lazy," I said, my voice low but steady, ungrateful, that I didn't deserve help. All while living off money meant for my future. You made me feel small, less than. All along you were the one stealing from me. His face twisted, whether in shame or anger, I couldn't tell. Grandpa slid the folder across the table, spread slightly financial statements, transaction records, legal letters. "Proof. We've spoken to the bank," Grandpa said. "We've spoken to the lawyer. We will pursue legal action if necessary." Dad stiffened. Grandpa continued, his voice like stone. "You repay every cent. And next Sunday at brunch, you read a statement to the entire family. You tell them the truth. All of it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mom sat down slowly, her face pale. Her hands trembled in her lap. She looked at Dad. "Daniel," she whispered, "tell me this isn't true." But he said nothing. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He just stared at the papers as if they might vanish if he refused to acknowledge them. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost, until I remembered the nights I'd come home exhausted from cleaning houses, the times I'd counted coins for groceries, the years of wondering why I wasn't enough for him to believe in. All while he watched from comfort, pretending I was the problem. Grandpa turned to me. "You'll move in with me next week," he said. "I've already contacted the realtor. We'll find you a real place. Clean start." I nodded, then I looked at my father. Really looked at him. He couldn't meet my eyes. The man who once told me, "You'll never make it without me," now looked like a stranger in his own skin, smaller, thinner, as if the truth itself had taken a bite out of him. And in that moment I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. Free of the weight I'd carried, trying to win his approval. Free of the guilt I'd been conditioned to feel every time I needed help. Free of the illusion that blood makes family whole. Sometimes it just stains it. And as we stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, Grandpa's hand gently brushed my shoulder. "You were never the failure," he said. I didn't reply. But for the first time in years, I believed it. Same restaurant, same table, same floral centerpieces and tiny glass vases. But nothing felt the same. The seat I used to be shoved into between a wobbly chair and the serveress ice bucket was now occupied by my cousin. I sat next to Grandpa, at the head of the table. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, but it didn't warm me, not today. I felt cold, electrified, as if the truth we were about to unearth had soaked into my bones. People filed in with fake smiles and polite hugs, not knowing what was coming. My aunt brought her signature fruit tart. My uncle was already complaining about the parking. Laughter floated around like perfume surface deep, and completely unaware of the detonation about to happen. Then the door opened. My father stepped in. He looked different, not disheveled, not defeated, but hollow. The usual forced charm didn't stretch across his face today. His eyes were shadowed, like someone who hadn't slept well in days. Mom walked in behind him, rigid and composed. My sister followed, wearing sunglasses indoors like she was shielding herself from reality. No one said a word as they approached. Grandpa stood, calm, tall. His hand grazed mine for just a moment, brief reassurance. Then he looked around the table. "I want to thank you all for coming," he began, voice level but louder than usual. "I know these brunches are a tradition, but today won't be like the others." The room stilled, even the servers paused. A knife scraped against a plate, and then silence. "I need to speak about something that's been hidden too long," he continued. 4 years ago, I sent $70,000 to help Kayla, my granddaughter, get her start after graduation. I was told she used the money to buy a beautiful apartment. She was thriving. He paused, letting the weight settle. That was a lie. Murmurs began to rise, confused glances darting across the table. He raised a hand. The silence returned. "Daniel took that money," Grandpa said, turning to face my father. "He moved it into an investment account in his own name. And while he grew richer, Kayla lived in a basement, no windows, sleeping beside a boiler, eating on the floor." Gasps. A dropped fork. Someone whispered my name. I kept my eyes on the linen napkin in my lap. "He let her believe she was worthless," Grandpa said, his voice tight now. Lazy, entitled, while he smiled at family dinners and painted himself as a responsible father. He turned fully to face my dad now. "You betrayed both of us." My father's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "And from this moment forward," Grandpa continued, "you are removed from my estate. Every asset, every trust, every legal power you once held is now revoked." He reached into his blazer and pulled out a single folded paper. "Read it," he said, laying it on the table in front of my father, out loud. Now, Dad stared at the paper like it might bite him. For a second I wondered if he would walk out, throw a tantrum, deny everything. But he didn't. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the page. His voice, usually so self-assured, was brittle. "To my family," he began, eyes fixed on the words instead of anyone in the room. "I stole from my daughter, Kayla Whitmore. I took funds intended for her future and used them for personal financial gain without her knowledge or consent. I let her struggle. I let her believe she was alone. I did this while lying to both her and my father. I accept full responsibility. I will repay the full amount within 6 months. I am deeply sorry." When he finished, there was only silence. No applause. No forgiveness. Just the dense, suffocating stillness of a family fractured. I finally looked up. I didn't cry. I didn't blink. I just looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. Everyone around the table looked different now. My cousin stared at my father like she didn't recognize him. My aunt held her napkin against her lips like she might be sick. My mother looked like someone had carved a hole straight through her. My sister had taken off her sunglasses. Grandpa sat down beside me and placed a hand on mine. His skin was warm, solid. "This," he whispered, "this is the truth. Let them sit with it." And they did. For the rest of the meal, no one made a toast. No one asked for coffee refills. We just sat there, mid the wreckage of a lie 4 years deep. A lie I had lived inside. But not anymore. That night, Grandpa and I stood side by side on his porch. The air was cool, touched by that quiet stillness only found in the hours between what has happened and what is coming next. The world around us was still turning, but ours just for a moment had stopped. "You never asked for anything," he said softly. "I stopped asking," I replied. My voice didn't crack this time. "After a while, you get tired of hearing no, being told your dreams are indulgent, that you're not enough." Looked at me, his expression unreadable, but I caught the flicker of guilt in his eyes. I should have checked in sooner, he whispered, but I shook my head. I'm glad you didn't, I said, because now I know. Now I really know who's in my corner. No more illusions. He smiled, faint but firm. You're not going back to that basement? And I didn't. The new apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows. Real windows. Glass so clean it felt like I could walk through it and fall straight into the sky. The day I moved in, the sunlight streamed across the hardwood floors like it had been waiting just for me, waiting years behind. Brick walls and smoke-stained curtains and silence. I stood in the middle of the living room with boxes unopened. Furniture still wrapped in plastic, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Hope. That night, I sat on my new bed, a real one, with a frame and everything, and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the trackpad before clicking a folder buried deep in my hard drive. It was labeled Designs, maybe someday. I hadn't touched it since college, since the day my dad looked at my final portfolio and said, "It's cute, but when are you going to get serious?" I clicked. Inside were dozens of sketches, layouts, 3D mock-ups, concepts for small homes, community spaces, sustainable apartments. Ideas I once believed could change how people lived. I stared at them and felt like I was seeing a version of myself I'd buried alive. Maybe she hadn't died. Maybe she'd just been waiting for sunlight. Over the next few weeks, I applied. Design firms, freelance boards, local co-ops. I stayed up late editing renders, rebuilding my confidence pixel by pixel, line by line. I built a portfolio. I put myself out there, not as someone begging for a shot, but as someone finally claiming her voice. And then it happened. 3 months later, I got a call from a small architecture firm downtown. "We're working on a community housing initiative," the woman on the phone said. "We need someone who understands how to create dignity in small spaces." I smiled so wide it hurt. "I've lived that," I told her. When I walked into their office for the interview, I wore the same beige coat my mom once called cheap-looking, but I walked tall in it. The receptionist offered me coffee. Creative director offered me a seat. By the time I left, I had a signed contract in my bag and something even more precious in my chest. Validation. It wasn't just a job. It was a declaration. That living in a basement didn't mean I belonged beneath anyone. That every scraped knee, every silent meal, every time I swallowed my pride instead of asking for help, had led here. It's not in spite of what I endured, but because I survived it. Months passed. Then one Sunday morning, the roles reversed. I hosted brunch. Not in a restaurant. Not in someone else's dining room. In my apartment. Mine. The table was mismatched on purpose, chair thrifted and repainted. Real plates, homemade quiche, mimosas with actual orange juice, not the budget kind I used to water down with tap, while the sunlight poured in like a guest of honor. Grandpa brought flowers and set them gently into the vase I bought with my first paycheck. My cousin, the one who once rolled her eyes at my art stuff, now asked me about color palettes and mood boards. Mom came. She brought a pie and a quiet apology baked somewhere between the crust and the silence. Dad didn't show. He hadn't since the day of the letter. He repaid the money. On time. Precisely to the cent. But his words stayed printed on paper, never spoken, and maybe that was the apology I needed. Some absences don't feel like loss. Some absences are the most peaceful sound in the room. As we cleared the plates and passed around fresh fruit, Grandpa leaned toward me. His eyes were glassy, not from sadness, but something gentler. "This," he said quietly, "this is what I imagined. The day I sent that money, I touched his hand. Me too." But what I didn't say, what I couldn't explain out loud, was that this wasn't just a new apartment, or a new job, or even a new life. It was the end of a war I'd been fighting in silence, and the first sunrise that felt like it belonged to me. Sometimes revenge doesn't come in the form of screaming matches or slammed doors. Sometimes it's quieter. It's standing in a sunlit room, sipping your own coffee, in a home you earned back from silence. It's watching the people who dismissed you shrink into the shadows of their own lies. And it's knowing that you didn't just survive the betrayal, you transformed it. Kayla didn't burn bridges. She built something better on the other side of them. No longer the forgotten daughter. No longer the girl who settled for basements and borrowed dreams. She became the architect of her own life, and sometimes the greatest revenge is living in peace. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or betrayed by the people closest to you, let this be your reminder. You are allowed to rewrite the ending. And maybe, just maybe, the sunlight has been waiting for you too. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to rise from the basement of someone else's lies? We read every word,